Chapter 10. The imperial city buzzed with anticipation. Servants scurried through grand corridors, their arms laden with fine silk tablecloths, towering trays of delicacies, and golden candelabras that flickered in the afternoon light. Nobles arrived in elegant carriages, their footmen hurrying to open gilded doors, allowing jeweled slippers to touch the pristine marble roads of the palace grounds. The air was thick with the scent of fresh roses and honeyed wine, mingling with the sound of harps playing in distant halls. Within the walls of the Sapphire Palace, preparations were more chaotic than refined. Unlike the Emerald Palace, where every servant's attention was devoted to its sole occupant, the Sapphire Palace bustled with preparations for incoming guests. Furniture was dusted, floral arrangements adjusted, and golden plates polished until they gleamed under the sun. The few remaining maids had little time to spare for second Princess Jeanette Margarita, save for one, Marie, a soft-spoken girl with caramel brown hair tied into a neat bun. Jeanette, however, was unbothered by the lack of attention. In fact, she saw it as an advantage. Seated before an ornate mirror, she admired the gown gifted to her by Duke Alpheus. It was a vision of opulent green and gold, a gown designed not for subtlety but for admiration. The bodice hugged her form delicately, embroidered with intricate golden vines that climbed up the fabric like regal filigree. The neckline was modest but adorned with small emerald-cut jewels, catching the candlelight with every slight movement. The sleeves draped elegantly, sheer with the faintest touch of sparkle, while the skirt billowed out in layered chiffon, cascading like rippling water. Her long, straight chestnut brown hair had been curled slightly at the ends, giving it a soft bounce as it rested down her back. Marie carefully fastened a simple golden headpiece above her bangs, a gift from the Duke. It was nothing compared to the ruby-encrusted tiaras of true imperial daughters, but Jeanette did not mind. What she lacked in title, she planned to make up for in influence. She gazed at her reflection, her crystal blue eyes gleaming with hidden ambition. "Tonight is my chance." Marie, adjusting the folds of the gown, spoke hesitantly. "Your Highness, you look breathtaking. The Duke will surely be pleased." Jeanette smiled sweetly, reaching out to take Marie's hands in her own. "Thank you, Marie. I wouldn't look this lovely without your help." The maid flushed at the praise, but Jeanette's thoughts had already drifted elsewhere. Tonight, she would stand in the Emperor's sight, and through him, she would secure her father's favor. Meanwhile, in the Emerald Palace, everything was meticulously organized. Unlike the frenzied atmosphere of the Sapphire Palace, the maids here moved with quiet precision, ensuring that every detail of Princess Athanasia's appearance reflected her status as the Emperor's second for the night. Anna Green, her young secretary, read from a parchment scroll, her sharp green eyes scanning each name as she spoke. "Representatives from the Kingdom of Rassent, the Eledian Dukedom, and the Mari Sultanate will be present. The nobles of the western region have also confirmed their attendance, and..." Athanasia barely had time to nod in response, before another maid spun her around, adjusting the corset of her gown. Her dress, unlike Jeanette's, was not crafted for admiration but authority. A masterpiece of deep sapphire blue and imperial gold, it exuded elegance and commanded respect. The bodice was embroidered with golden phoenixes, each feather delicately woven to symbolize rebirth and power. The sleeves were long and sheer, billowing slightly before fastening at her wrists with ruby-encrusted cuffs. The skirt flowed like silk spun from moonlight, cascading in rich layers that trailed slightly behind her. As her maids fastened the finishing touches, her long platinum blonde curls were carefully arranged to fall effortlessly down her shoulders, framing her crystal blue eyes. The final adornment was placed atop her head, a ruby tiara, its deep crimson gems shimmering under the candlelight. Unlike the delicate headpieces worn by mere nobles, this tiara came from the imperial vault itself, a sign that tonight, she stood as the Emperor's daughter in full right. Athanasia let out a soft sigh, straightening her posture as her maids adjusted the final folds of her gown. "Will my father expect a speech?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with quiet resignation. Anna glanced up from her notes. "Most likely. His Majesty rarely acknowledges it, but as the imperial princess, you are expected to represent the royal family when needed." Athanasia let her crystal blue gaze meet Anna's, expression unreadable. I see. She had long grown accustomed to this role. The role of a perfect imperial daughter, trained to sit beside her father. But tonight, she would do her duty, as she always had. As the final preparations were completed, the great bronze palace bells tolled across the imperial city, signaling the hour of the emperor's banquet. And so, the two princesses, different in both status and ambition, stepped forward into the grand halls of destiny, one seeking recognition, the other bound by duty. Preparations for the emperor's banquet. The main palace banquet hall was a breathtaking display of imperial opulence. The high vaulted ceilings were adorned with intricate golden engravings, and massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the room. The floor, polished to perfection, reflected the golden candlelight like a shimmering lake. Long banquet tables draped in deep crimson silk lined the hall, filled with the finest delicacies the empire had to offer, succulent roasted meats, delicate pastries, and imported wines from distant kingdoms. Foreign dignitaries mingled with the empire's nobles, exchanging pleasantries and speculation about the evening's events. I heard there is a second princess, a noble from the kingdom of Lune inquired, sipping his wine. A girl with brown hair and crystal blue eyes, staying in the Sapphire Palace? The empire's nobles laughed, some shaking their heads in amusement. That would be Princess Jeanette Margarita, a viscount smirked. Though princess is a generous title. She has yet to be fully acknowledged by His Majesty, a baron added, swirling the amber liquid in his goblet. That is why she resides in the guest palace, rather than one of the imperial residences. She just appeared one day, another noblewoman whispered behind her fan. The emperor hardly speaks of her. A sharp scoff cut through their chatter. Countess Rosalia, draped in a deep red gown of crushed velvet, stood nearby, her green eyes flashing with cold disdain. She bore a striking resemblance to Jeanette, straight brown hair, the same elegant features, but her presence was far more commanding. I suggest you all be mindful of your words, she said smoothly, taking a slow sip from her goblet. Fortunes rise and fall in the blink of an eye, especially in this court. A moment of uneasy silence followed her remark, before the nobles hastily changed the subject. The grand doors of the banquet hall swung open, drawing every eye to the entrance. Jeanette Margarita stepped forward, her delicate hands resting lightly on Ezekiel's arm as he escorted her inside. The hall quieted slightly, not out of awe, but out of curiosity. She wore an exquisite emerald green gown, a gift from Duke Alpheus, that shimmered like crushed jewels under the candlelight. Golden embroidery in the shape of delicate vines trailed down the bodice, wrapping around her waist before spilling into the flowing skirt. The fabric was luxurious, soft as silk, yet structured enough to give her an air of refined elegance. Her chestnut brown hair, curled softly at the ends, cascaded down her back, accentuated by a simple gold headpiece, not as grand as an imperial crown, but still befitting a noblewoman of high status. Her crystal blue eyes, the signature mark of the royal bloodline, gleamed with barely concealed determination. The nobles observed her with thinly veiled amusement. She certainly looks the part, a countess murmured. But no matter how fine her gown is, a marquis muttered to his wife, she is still a girl without favor. She's trying too hard, another nobleman sneered. Duke Alpheus must be desperate if he dressed her like this. Jeanette, hearing their whispers, kept her smile in place. Let them talk, she told herself. Tonight, I will prove them wrong. She walked forward with grace, Ezekiel by her side, his white hair and golden eyes an unmistakable resemblance to his father. With Countess Rosalia guiding her interactions, Jeanette engaged in polite conversation, her words carefully measured, her laughter soft yet deliberate. I will make them see me as more than just the other princess. A watchful gaze. From the shadows of the grand hall, a young man in black and royal purple observed the scene without introduction, without a word. His short black hair was slightly tousled, framing his strikingly handsome features. His ruby-red eyes flickered under the dim candlelight, scanning the crowd, his sharp gaze missing nothing. Then, his eyes locked onto Jeanette Margarita. His gaze darkened. A faint pulse of magic crackled in the air, unnoticed by the others. His eyes glowed with suspicion. As Jeanette entered the banquet hall, her presence caused a stir among the nobles and foreign dignitaries. Whispers spread like wildfire, circulating the curious spectacle of her arrival ahead of the emperor. She came in before the emperor? A noblewoman from a neighboring kingdom muttered, raising an eyebrow. Is that usual for a princess? I don't think so, said another noble, a tall man with a heavily embroidered suit. The emperor hasn't even arrived yet. A princess should always enter after His Majesty. How peculiar. One foreign dignitary, a tall man from Eldaria, leaned towards his companion and spoke in a low tone. Do you think the emperor has started to favor her? Favor? The other dignitary replied, his brow furrowing. From what I've heard, she's not even acknowledged by His Majesty fully. She's not really part of his immediate court, is she? Jeanette felt the weight of their judgment, though her posture remained unyielding. Her blue eyes, though sparkling with the unmistakable jewel tone of the royal bloodline, set her apart from the emperor, and she could feel the murmurs around her growing louder. She looks so different from the emperor, a foreign noblewoman whispered, her voice dripping with disapproval. No resemblance to the man at all. Jeanette's gaze darkened, but she kept her composure, knowing that her appearance was a point of contention. She might have been his daughter, but she was still not recognized as part of his inner circle, and it was evident in the way the nobles eyed her. A voice from across the room interrupted the whispering. The steward stepped forward, announcing the arrival of the true heir apparent. Their Majesties, Emperor Claude and Princess Athanasia de Algerobelia. The room fell silent. The double doors of the banquet hall opened, and the Emperor, Claude de Algerobelia, entered with an imposing presence. His sapphire blue uniform, intricately adorned with gold embroidery, shimmered as he moved. A crimson-red cape cascaded from his shoulders, the rich fabric billowing slightly as he walked, exuding the regal weight of his station. The light caught the edges of his golden hair, its short cut gleaming like the sun itself. By his side, the Princess Athanasia stepped forward with effortless grace, her own dress mirroring her father's. Her sapphire blue gown flowed beautifully, the delicate silk forming soft ripples around her feet as she moved. The gown was luxurious yet subtle, with intricate lacework along the neckline and sleeves, giving it an elegant, refined touch. The bodice was fitted perfectly to her slender frame, and her long platinum blonde hair, wavy and soft, cascaded down her back like a silken waterfall. Both father and daughter shared a remarkable resemblance, each with ocean blue eyes that sparkled with the same intensity, their features nearly identical. The nobles and foreign dignitaries could not deny the bond between them. It was more than just familial, it was an unspoken understanding of mutual respect and deep affection. One dignitary from Fowler turned to another with awe in his voice. You can see it in his eyes. How much he adores her. The emperor's love for his daughter is undeniable. I had heard whispers of how close they are, said a countess from the Eldarin kingdom, watching the pair with a soft smile. But seeing it in person, it's clear the emperor's heart belongs to his daughter. Not many rulers look at their children that way. The nobles exchanged glances, murmuring to each other as they compared the two princesses. Athanasia, standing beside the emperor, was a vision of imperial dignity. It was hard to imagine anyone doubting her place in the line of succession. Her calm and composed demeanor made it clear that she had the full support of the emperor, something Jeanette couldn't claim. Aren't they a perfect pair? A noblewoman said, her voice filled with admiration. It's hard to deny that Athanasia is the true heir to the throne. Jeanette, now standing by herself in the midst of the crowd, couldn't help but overhear the whispers. Her gaze hardened. She had learned to live with the comparisons, but the sting never fully faded. The way the nobles looked at Athanasia, with such adoration and reverence, only fueled Jeanette's desire to prove herself, to show that she too had the right to stand by her father's side. But Claude's gaze, as it landed on Athanasia, was the most telling of all. His eyes softened as he looked at his daughter, his expression full of pride and love. For a brief moment, he even reached down to adjust her tiara, a small, intimate gesture that revealed more than any public appearance ever could. Jeanette stiffened, her jaw tightening. The emperor's attention was entirely on Athanasia, and Jeanette couldn't help but feel the deep ache of being overlooked. As the nobles continued to watch, and as Athanasia and her father conversed, the difference between the two princesses became all too clear. Jeanette would have to work harder, prove herself more, if she ever hoped to gain her father's favor and place herself firmly within the royal circle. As the Emperor Claude and Princess Athanasia made their way to the golden thrones, their footsteps echoed through the grand banquet hall, a soft reminder of their regal presence. The nobles, who had been waiting anxiously, stood up in reverence, their eyes fixed on the pair, whispers passing between them like a wave of quiet admiration. The air seemed to shimmer with the anticipation of the emperor's mood, for it was widely known that the emperor was at his most receptive when Athanasia was present. Her presence brought a certain serenity and confidence to the emperor, making him more willing to entertain proposals and engage in diplomatic discussions. "The emperor is in a good mood tonight," one of the foreign dignitaries murmured to his companion, his voice laced with cautious hope. "If Princess Athanasia is near, surely we will have a chance." "Yes, of course," the other dignitary agreed. "She's his favorite, after all. The emperor listens when she's present. We must make sure to approach him now." The nobles in the room moved quickly, eager to engage in conversations with the emperor and Princess Athanasia, knowing that this was the moment to secure favors and make their case for trade deals and alliances. Several of the imperial courtiers rushed forward to present themselves, knowing that Athanasia's influence would tip the scales in their favor. However, Countess Rosalia, who had been standing by her niece, could not conceal her frustration. Her green eyes narrowed as she observed the nobles making their way towards the emperor, barely sparing a glance for Jeanette. Rosalia's lips pressed into a thin line, but instead of simply standing there, watching in silence, she leaned down slightly, her voice cold but controlled. "Jeanette," she said, the hint of impatience in her tone. "Go. Talk to them. Start conversations with anyone willing to listen." Jeanette's eyes flickered briefly towards her aunt, the irritation clear in her expression, but she gave a small nod, gathering her composure. With graceful steps, she moved toward the group of nobles, her hands clasped delicately in front of her. She tried her best to smile warmly, despite the fact that the nobles had already made it clear how little they cared for her presence. One of the noblewomen, a stately woman with dark hair and a calculating look, glanced at Jeanette with an expression that could only be described as dismissive. "Ah, the second princess," she said, a polite but not welcoming smile on her lips. "I trust you're enjoying the evening? It must be such an adjustment for you, being placed in the Sapphire Palace instead of the Emerald Palace, Jeanette's lips curled slightly, not bothering to mask the bitterness in her voice as she replied, "The Sapphire Palace has its charm. I am accustomed to the company I keep." The noblewoman gave a soft chuckle, clearly unperturbed by Jeanette's response. She turned away to speak to her companions, and Jeanette, feeling the sting of rejection, turned toward the nearest group of foreign dignitaries. Their eyes flickered briefly to her, but their attention was quickly stolen away by Princess Athanasia and the emperor's presence. Meanwhile, Lucas, the young genius magician, stood near the back of the hall, his eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. His black and purple attire was in stark contrast to the colorful gowns of the nobles, his ruby eyes glinting with cool calculation as he observed the events unfolding. He barely moved, save for the occasional flicker of his gaze as he kept watch over everything happening in the hall. His presence was not one to attract attention, yet there was an air of mystery around him, something that made people wary without understanding why. Beside him, Sir Felix, the emperor's loyal knight, stood in his usual stoic manner, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. His gaze flicked between the emperor and the princess, ever vigilant, making sure that no threats would approach his charges, and keeping an eye on the nobles whose conversations could easily veer into treasonous waters. "I trust all is in order tonight, Sir Felix?" Lucas asked, his voice quiet but sharp. His tone held an underlying current of curiosity as he observed the nobility around him, his gaze occasionally landing on Jeanette, but never lingering too long. Felix's gaze briefly moved toward Lucas, his expression neutral, as always. "Everything is as it should be, Master Lucas. The emperor is in a good mood tonight, so it's best not to disrupt the peace. We must allow him to enjoy this night as he sees fit. Lucas' lips twitched in a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. I'm not here to disrupt anything, he replied, his voice still low. But it seems, the second princess is already feeling the weight of her position. Felix's gaze shifted towards Jeanette for a brief moment, before he nodded slightly, his eyes calculating. She knows her place, Master Lucas. But I doubt that will deter her for long. Indeed, Jeanette was standing taller now, forcing her smile to remain intact as she attempted to engage with the nobles, despite their apparent disinterest. She would prove them wrong. Like, comment and subscribe to be notified for updates in the series.